Hiya guys, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of Pyramid, the most critically acclaimed, highly financially successful movie of 2014. What the? I have gotten really bored with doing these vlogs, so I feel the need to entertain myself, and hopefully entertain you in the process, so expect these weird ass openings. So anyway, the Pyramid. I first heard about the Pyramid when I was searching through IMDb to see what movies were being released in December, and I was immediately drawn in by the premise. It's about, a handful of archaeologists and documentary filmmakers going into this newly discovered pyramid where they promptly become trapped and are hunted by an unspeakable evil. I think that there is so much potential in regards to the idea of a pyramid-themed horror flick. There's so much you could do with that location, both in terms of set design and storytelling, that can help it stand out amongst the masses. It seems like most horror films these days all are just way too alike, both aesthetically and in terms of story. And the fact that this was a found footage movie just reinforced the idea that the pyramid must stand out, and whether it was going to be good or bad, the fact that it takes place in a pyramid is going to give it some form of identity. Now, I was a little confused because it seemed like this film shared an identical premise with As Above, So Below, the only difference being the location. The pyramid obviously takes place in the pyramid, and As Above, So Below took place in the catacombs of Paris. And that film wasn't especially successful, both financially or critically, so it just seemed odd for the pyramid to jump on that bandwagon. Now, at the time, I did not realize that the pyramid was, I guess, filmed a couple years ago and just sat on a shelf until they finally decided to release it now. That's the first sign that this probably was not going to be a very good movie. But as that release date crept up, I was a little confused because I had yet to see any trailer for this movie whenever I'd go to the theaters, and once again, that's at least once a week. Even As Above, So Below, it wasn't attached to that movie. And I didn't see any TV spots. It wasn't being screened for critics, so it's almost like this movie did not really exist outside of my head. Nobody was talking about it, nobody seemed to know about it, and yet, according to Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb, it was going to be released this last week. So that really started to concern me. I eventually did search for the trailer online, and I was mostly underwhelmed, but also a little confused because I couldn't tell whether or not it was a found footage movie. At times it was obvious that it was found footage. You'd have a character holding what is clearly a handheld camera, and somebody would be speaking into said camera, but otherwise, aesthetically, it seemed a bit too clean. It lacked the grain that usually accompanies found footage flicks. So I just wasn't sure. Then when I looked up online, I heard very inconsistent claims. Some people said that it was found footage, other people said that it wasn't. So all the way up until I got into the theaters, sat down and began watching the movie, I had absolutely no idea what to expect. But I take no shame in not knowing whether or not it was going to be a found footage flick, because the movie doesn't seem to be very sure whether or not it was supposed to be a found footage flick. This is one of those films where the fact that this footage has been edited together really makes no sense. It's not quite as glaring as Apollo 18, but it's still pretty distracting. But what's worse than that is that there are some angles that obviously could not have been filmed by one of the crew members. Now, people complain about that all the time, but to be fair, sometimes the action goes so quickly that it's possible that the viewer is missing something. But in this case, nope. There's absolutely no explanation unless Anubis somehow stole somebody's camera and is filming them from the shadows for some reason. Maybe there is a deleted scene where you see Anubis take one of their cameras and just decides to, start screwing around with it because it's got to be really boring being trapped in this pyramid for thousands of years. But like 90% of the time, it's structured like a conventional found footage flick. The majority of the content is seen through the lens of one of the cameras that a character is holding. But then there will be some bit where they have to get to this new room that they haven't been in before, which involves them, like breaking apart the wall, and then they'll be peering inside, and where is the camera stationed? From the room that they haven't even entered yet. And you could see all these characters in the same shot, so there's absolutely no way to explain it unless, once again, Anubis is filming them for some reason. And then there's this other bit where these characters, they enter the tunnel and they're seen through a wide shot from a distance away, and it's actually a pretty cool looking shot because the only lighting is from the lights that they're carrying, so it looks like they're just totally surrounded in darkness, and it's pretty impressive in itself. But once again, you see all the characters in shot, so it's not like somebody just went all the way ahead just to get this cool looking visual, especially as at that point they know something is hunting them. Now, it's not like The Pyramid is the first film to break the fourth wall like this. Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, Cannibal Holocaust, District 9, they all broke apart the found footage angle and often played out as conventional movies. But the difference is, in those films there was always the right context. They could justify that transition, for their stories. In the case of The Pyramid, there is absolutely no justification. It's just that it randomly stops being found footage for various individual shots before resuming that format once more. To me, that just suggests that the filmmakers were being very lazy and did not want to find ways to explain why there would be this certain shot. And that I find that to be infuriating. As bad as many found footage flicks like Paranormal Activity 4 can be, at least the filmmakers deserve some credit for sticking, with that formula through the entire movie up until the very end. So that was very distracting. I did not like that at all. And if you couldn't tell, based on what I've said so far, The Pyramid is a pretty bad movie. Now, I did not hate it as much as I thought I would. At the absolute least, it's short and it's relatively fast-paced. It gets going almost immediately. And because it's not a paranormal-themed found footage flick, I will say that I personally enjoyed it more than some of the lesser examples of this style of filmmaking, like Paranormal Activity 4, which might be technically superior, but it's also a lot more boring. I occasionally did get impatient with The Pyramid, but I was never bored by it. Now, it's not scary either. Now, there are some successful moments where, yeah, the film did kind of creep me out, but I'm also very claustrophobic, so it would be very difficult for the film not to have that effect on me. I will praise the set design. I always felt like, yeah, these characters were in a pyramid. Well, I don't want to say always. Sometimes the direction was so bad that the way they'd frame certain scenes, it made it look like they were on a movie set. But I was concerned based on the trailers that even though they'd call it a pyramid, that it would only look like they can easily be going through any kind of cavern, and that the pyramid angle wouldn't stand out. But that wasn't the case. I always felt like they were in a pyramid, and I liked the various traps and stuff that you'd expect in a movie that is based so much in Egyptian lore. Uh, but the oh yeah, and I'll also say that the sound design was pretty good too. The best part in the entire movie is when these characters they start hearing a person calling out, somebody else screaming, and then just various roars. Just the sound in general really made that scene work to where I was totally into it. It was very intense and unnerving. Unfortunately, the entire movie is not like that, but at least it had one good scene. But otherwise, I have to criticize everything else. Various shots by the director, they didn't just break the fourth wall, but they were very telegraphed. That was probably a very poor way to phrase it, but so you'll have like various scenes where you're seeing the characters in their natural positions, but then there's like this one shot that's very awkward, and immediately as soon as I see it, I'm like, okay, well, that person's about to get killed. They're going to be attacked from behind, because that's the only reason they would show that character from this angle, and indeed I was correct. How come nobody saw that coming when this Anubis character is pretty freaking big? That's a whole other thing I could criticize, but the direction, it wasn't awful all the time, but the awful parts stand out more than the good parts. The special effects weren't very good either. Anubis is generally rendered using CGI, and while it looks fine at a distance, it's still pretty dodgy CGI effects. At times, it looked like they had a person in a suit and were using makeup with CGI extensions, but like it's really awkward because during some of the close-ups, you could see what looks to be very human eyes. Like the makeup kind of goes, like around like this, so you could see normal skin texture, then surrounded by obvious prosthetics. I don't know if that was really the case, but for the fact that it resembled that's bad. That's very bad filmmaking all around. Somebody deserves to be criticized for that. And then at one point, Anubis is terrorizing some chick while she's climbing up a ladder in this thin tunnel, and it looks like they just start using a puppet, so that I could never take Anubis seriously because he always just looked so phony. And then there's these weird hairless cat creatures. Also, once again, they were usually rendered using very poor CGI, so I couldn't take them seriously either. But the script is god-awful. This has to be one of the worst screenplays to come out in 2014. For one, most of the stuff they focus on doesn't really tie into the overall story. So they make this big deal of traditional archaeology versus more technology-driven archaeology, and how those ideologies clash. So much of the beginning, the opening act, is focusing on this clash. But does it ever go anywhere? Nope. They just waste a shit ton of screen time on this idea that has absolutely no purpose within the story. There will be times when characters will start spouting out all sorts of exposition about, where they are, and they're just reading the various hieroglyphics that they're seeing on the walls, but it seemed like the majority of that never went anywhere either. And it's not like, as above, so below, where at least there's some fun to be found out of trying to solve the puzzles with the characters. Here, they're just talking, and it's going in one ear and out the other. I'm not paying attention to what they're saying, and what little I did catch just seemed totally irrelevant. But the fun parts is when, there's some real serious plot holes in this film. So they're crawling through this tunnel. Once again, my claustrophobia is really kicking in because they could barely fit through it, and then these cat things start chasing them. And it's like, okay, well, that's adding to the suspense because, there's nothing more horrifying than being trapped in a small space like this when something is pursuing you. But then it becomes clear that something is actually chasing those cats. And that is Anubis, who is much, much larger than your average human being. And yet somehow it's able to squeeze through this tunnel that the humans themselves are barely able to fit through. And then it grabs somebody and pulls them in. So obviously the filmmakers did not think that one through. Maybe they hadn't fully finished designing the creature when they had shot this scene, so they weren't expecting it to be this big. I don't know, but that sucked either way. And then there's a soldier guy who temporarily rescues them. And this leads to some issues later on, too, because he shoots through the tunnel, and apparently bullets are ineffective against Anubis, even though later on we see, getting him with a flare or stabbing him does hurt this creature, so Anubis is a pretty crappy god if that can injure him. But once again, for some reason, those bullets don't seem to work. Now, later on in the movie, somebody tries shooting him and it doesn't work either, but you could presume that maybe, those bullets missed, that, this character, couldn't really aim very effectively and they weren't very good with a gun, so those bullets just didn't hit Anubis. But it would be pretty freaking difficult to miss him while Anubis is crawling through this very small tunnel. Now you also have to wonder, how did the soldier get there? Because they make a point that there's only one way out, and they suggest that that's how the soldier got in the first place. So apparently this soldier climbed down through the ladder, went through Anubis's crypt, never encountering the monster, ignored all the various bodies that were littered in that area, didn't get any help or backup, and then, went through all these traps and just happened to find out where they were, even though it seemed like it would be easier to get in that room from where the characters were than vice versa. But once again, the film does not want you to think about that because it's very lazily scripted. They just wanted that soldier to be there, and they wanted a jump scare to where Anubis grabs that soldier and pulls him in. I hate that kind of writing. That's just too lazy. The characters are not very likable. In fact, there's aspects about all of them that annoyed me. The two archaeologists, they just have to stop, read all these hieroglyphics in the loudest voice possible. And I was thinking, especially after the soldier gets killed, you want to be quiet. You do not want to draw attention to yourself. If you're going to talk aloud about what you're seeing, then use a whispering voice, or at least talk normally. Don't talk like you're trying to draw attention. So that got on my nerves. There's this one girl who, she starts going crazy, and they do try to justify this because she gets wounded and that wound is getting infected, but she starts blaming the professor for getting them involved in the first place, which pissed me off because the professor was the only person who did not want to go into the pyramid. It was his daughter and one of the other guys who had to retrieve this robot that was broken. They were the ones that wanted to go in there. He just, eventually reluctantly agreed. And this character knows this, so she should be blaming the daughter. But no, she takes out her anger on this guy, and she forgot that the room that they entered was her idea. The professor wanted to stay in this one location because he did not want to, he didn't know if it was safe going into these other rooms. Well, this woman, she's the one who started pursuing the idea of, escaping, going through this uncharted territory. So it's her fault too, and even though once again we're supposed to understand why she's freaking out like this, it just made that character unlikable. There's the comedic relief cameraman who totally screwed up the tone for this movie. He's just making comedic quips here and there, even after people start dying. Yet for some strange reason, he starts becoming the voice of reason later on, pointing out that there is absolutely no time for these archaeologists to be just reading all these hieroglyphics, that they have to focus on getting out. But, so he was annoying. I also didn't think he was a very good dramatic actor. So even though, if the material was better, I could see him working as, an amusing comedic relief. When he's trying to be serious and scared, I just never bought it. In fact, the woman who I complained about earlier, she also wasn't a very good actress. She seemed like she was trying not to crack up half the time. So I have to criticize her performance as well. And then there's this other guy who's just sort of there. He was an asshole because he's acting incredibly rude to the professor, who is his girlfriend's father. And the professor is just, he's not aware of how this advanced technology works. So he's asking, can you enhance this certain area when they're looking at the footage that the robot is capturing? And he's like, yeah, of course, this is $1 million technology. Douchebag, show some respect. And then, he starts, when the guy still thinks, we shouldn't be going into that pyramid. It's unsafe. The guy is like, well, my robot costs $1 million. Does he know how this works? It's loan. Well, that's your fucking problem. You're risking all of their lives just to get your robot. So why should I feel bad for him either? There's absolutely no reason to care about any of these characters. And they're all just idiots. They always do the stupid thing in order to drive the story. And that's another thing while I'm thinking about it too. There's this whole angle where there's toxic air, so they could start getting sick, especially once they get wounds. It starts getting into the open wounds and infecting them. Never goes anywhere. They just throw that in there for the sake of throwing that in there. Do they ever die from it? No. Do they ever go crazy and start attacking each other from it? No. Do they start mutating from it? No. It's just they get sick and they're constantly drawing attention to the fact that, oh, they're sick. We got to get out of here quickly. As if the freaking Anubis monster and man-eating cats weren't enough of a reason to get out of there. But that's it. This was just a very poorly written movie. The script is awful. The direction is not very good. The acting is mediocre at best. It's a crappy movie, but it is sometimes kind of fun to make fun of. If you're going to see this movie, watch it on the small screen, rent it through Netflix or whatever, with a bunch of friends, and make sure alcohol is involved, because The Pyramid is is often hilariously bad. But otherwise, do not go to the theaters to check this one out. It's a worse version of As Above, So Below, which might have not have been a good movie, but at least had some ambition to it. I felt the filmmakers tried. But I also will say, I never felt disoriented or nauseous by the editing and handheld camera work. It seemed like everything was pretty steady and easy to follow. It was just awful in terms of story, and it was not scary. So that is all I have to say. I did do a written review, so please read that. This video has probably gone on for quite some time. Oh, yes, it has. So I apologize for the length. I have released a new episode of Critiquing the Critics on Zenith Will Review, so please watch that. I have also done written reviews of Detective D and The Rise of the Sea Dragon, and I'm sure I've done something else. I just can't think of it off the top of my head. Oh, Terror Train, which is an 80s slasher, and my next one will be of Spookies. So read all of those. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I shall see you guys later.